having already considered the violent shake-up of the whole European continent during the French Revolution and its violent 19th century aftermath, which produced, in effect, the reorganization of Rome and her associates. I now properly turn next to the Jews. How did they fare during this time? As the universal cry of liberty, equality, fraternity fired moves to emancipate the downtrodden masses of Europe from their lot, it might have seemed inevitable that the benefits would be shared with their persecuted Jewish neighbors. And to an extent they were, both in Germany and in France, even before the revolution. In his day, Napoleon was amiably disposed towards them. But just as there was a subsequent reaction in favor of church and monarchical institutions, so there was a reverting to the ingrained anti-Semitism of Catholic and Protestant society. Accusations and persecutions erupted all over again in the so-called enlightened world, and emigration to find new homes began again. There was no ease, no rest for the sole of their foot, as Moses had foretold. Assimilation, tried again and again, failed. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, and there shall be no rest for the sole of thy foot. But in the wake of European nationalism, another national spirit, Zionism, arose. Zionism, however, differed in that it arose out of a national Jewish spirit that had been active for over 3,000 years and was founded in the unique role the nation had played as God's witnesses to the world. Moreover, it alone transcended all political borders, taking in many cultures and tongues. But the Jewish national consciousness and bonds of brotherhood that were stirred to increasing levels in the 19th century had no affinity with the lands in which the Jews were scattered. For its realization, Zionism would have to await the opportunity that eventually came after the First World War. Though it might seem strange, from the viewpoint of 21st century history, the modern expression of Jewish emancipation, encouraged by French nationalism during the Enlightenment, found its earliest growth in Germany. Under the rule of Frederick II, known as the Great, who occupied the throne of Prussia from 1740 to 1786. Berlin became the cradle and center of Haskalah, or Jewish Enlightenment. The Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, the grandfather of the famous composer Felix Mendelssohn, translated the Old Testament writing of Moses into German, creating a revolution and a dilemma for his brethren, who were torn between assimilation to Western civilization and faithfulness to Jewish traditions, which recoiled from the concept of the Torah in profane non-Hebrew languages. During the Enlightenment, Germany also saw the emergence of the so-called court Jew, whose expertise in financial and other matters was in demand. He lived under the protection of a princely court, but was obviously subject to envious rivalry from European Christians. Jews in Germany were classified in various categories, depending on their usefulness to the state, and were given differing levels of protection accordingly. Campaigning for Jewish emancipation in France eventually bore fruit under the revolutionary regime. In 1790 and 1791, the National Assembly granted full privileges to all Jews, and annulled the especially high taxes paid by those in Alsace. However, they still experienced hostility from the population at large, and from the press. Napoleon was put under pressure to revoke full citizenship for Jews. That was until they became Christians, and he called a Jewish assembly in 1806 to consider the matter. Impressed with their loyalty, he set up a Jewish Sanhedrin, and determined to create for them a Jerusalem in France, hoping thereby to gain the support of world Jewry for his cause. The Jews seem to have been taken in by the idea, and to have adopted assimilation in France in preference to "next year in Jerusalem," a phrase that is often sung at the end of the Passover Seder and at the end of the Nila service on Yom Kippur. Consistent with his general policy, Napoleon freed the ghettos in Rome, Venice, Mainz and Frankfurt. The honeymoon was over when Napoleon fell. The Congress of Vienna, that rearranged European affairs, gave no serious attention to the Jewish concerns. Rather, the Jews were blamed for the economic distresses that followed the wars. The ghettos were again closed off. Anti-Jewish riots with the battle cry, Hep-Hep, erupted in Germany in 1819, and again in 1830, earning the term, the Hep-Hep Riots. The term Hep-Hep has been said to be an acrostic acronym of the early Crusader Latin cry of Hierusalim arrest perdita, meaning Jerusalem is lost. Though this has very little basis of reference, in fact only one reference to this can be attributed to a single letter, published in a British newspaper on the 28th of August 1819. The most likely explanation is that it was based on the traditional herding cry of German shepherds, and thus has a rounding up cattle for slaughter meaning. The writer Immanuel states the following about the riots. The riots began on the 2nd of August 1819 in Wurzburg. After several days troops were called in. The Jewish population fled the city and spent several days in tents in the vicinity. Several Jews were killed during the riots in there. Further, Amos Elon, in his book, The Pity of It All, gives a further analysis. The riots swept through other Bavarian towns and villages, then spread to Bamberg, Bayreuth, Darmstadt, Karlsruhe, Mannheim, Frankfurt, Koblenz, Cologne, and other cities along the Rhine, and as far north as Bremen, Hamburg, and Lübeck. In some towns, the police appeared too late, or stood by idly, while the mob raged through the streets. In towns where the militia arrived promptly, the riots were put down relatively quickly. In Heidelberg the police were tardy in their response, but 2 professors and their students took the law into their hands and prevented a bloody pogrom. They restrained the culprits and made citizens' arrests. With the exception of Heidelberg, townspeople generally remained passive bystanders. In several cities, members of the bourgeoisie, students, and even university professors were among the instigators. It was clear that assimilation was impossible. In Deuteronomy chapter 28 Moses had said, "And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all the peoples, whither the Lord shall lead thee away." The Psalms had recorded the prophetic prayer, "Thou makest us a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and a derision to them that are round about us. Thou makest us a byword among the nations, a shaking of the head among the peoples." No one could doubt these words were true. The implication of Jewish unbelief and waywardness as the cause of their desolation was a reason for deep reflection for all Jews. The implication too, that the nations were the blind instruments of Israel's chastisement and were scheduled to ultimately receive, in kind, according to what they had given, or to have sobered their enemies, but the history of the times gives no indication that it did. In 1848, the year of revolutions, Jewish emancipation was again identified with the uprisings, but when these miscarried, Jewish liberty and equality were again revoked. In France, a conservative movement, Action Francaise, looked to rid the country of liberals, internationalists, aliens and Jews. A book emerged accusing the Jews and Freemasons of a joint plot to destroy Christendom and assert world dominion, though it was a familiar story. If the Jews were down, it was evidence of divine displeasure, which called for additional persecution. If the Jews were successful, as they were in finance and banking, they incurred the envious hatred of their contemporaries. In the East, in Poland and Russia, where the greater part of the Jewish masses lived, things were much worse. Although excluded from Russia in the 16th century, the Russian annexation of a large area of the country, to which Jewish habitation was restricted, was created, and heavier taxes imposed. Some slight amelioration of their lot was introduced by the Tsar in 1802, a consequence of liberalization in the West after the revolution, but, as elsewhere, a reaction occurred. Under Emperor Nicholas I of Russia and King of Poland, Jews were conscripted into the army. Youths of 12 to 18 years of age were taken from their families for harsh training and indoctrination into European Christianity. By the middle of the century, tens of thousands of Jews had been expelled, the Pale of Settlement further restricted in area, censorship of books imposed, community councils abolished, and Jews classified as either simply useful or non-useful. In the Crimean War, the number of Jews conscripted was trebled, and Jewish children were kidnapped. But worse was to come. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to get notifications of new videos. Like, share and comment below.